Us to kind of kick things off this morning. We appreciate that. It's interesting. I'm here as a television host because of my role formerly as a Chief Marketing Officer at a Fortune 100 company, but primarily because of the topic that we're here to talk about in terms of social media and the changing way it's done. And what's interesting is that the premise of the show is we go in and talk with the C-suite, where 99% of the people who work at a company never get to walk into. And today we're going to have an opportunity to be able to visit with some C-suite executives and talk about our changing roles. The show itself has been a phenomenal success. We're doing 50 times more than any other closest competitor online. We're seen by multiples and multiples of our full views of the show because of our interaction on social media, because of the way in which we do it, and we're very smart about it, and we have some very talented people here at Bloomberg, led by Maureen and the team, and they just do a super great job, and of course my team as well, because I do this in partnership with them. The role of CMO certainly has changed a great deal, certainly since the time in which I was a CMO 4 years ago, but I think the age of CMO as the way we knew it, as the Chief Advertising Officer, is clearly dead. It's over. If you're a Chief Advertising Officer, if that's the way you viewed your job, it's over. It's dead. It doesn't work that way anymore. In fact, 90% of those people who are moving into the C-suite as a CMO are not coming from traditional brand officers. They're coming from the business itself. And so it's interesting to listen to Douglas talk about marketing more as a communications role, when it's obviously grown to be much more than that, from product inception all the way through customer satisfaction. We have three excellent executives who are here. I've gotten to know them over the years, some a little bit more than others, and I'd like to bring each one of them up. First, Lisa, if you'll come forward. Valerie as well from Nokia, and Linda, please come and welcome them to have us take a seat. We have three great brands. First, Lisa is leading Goldman Sachs. Sophie had a chance to explain a little bit more of what she does, but she oversees pretty much everything at Goldman Sachs. Valerie's got a brand new phone today that's launching today. I was playing with that a little bit earlier. We give her a shameless plug.
Verizon,
shameless plug. Shameless plug. We like to do those.
This is the Nokia Lumia icon.
Which they advertise on United, my sponsor. And then also Linda, who you got to, I know Linda for many, many years. I always remember the first time I thought I was pretty cocky as a CMO, and I'm sitting next to, I think I'm pretty cocky most of the time, but that's funny, people, I don't care. But I remember the first time I was at a conference, and I'm sitting next to Dan Henson, who was the CMO at GE overall one time. And I'm thinking, geez, well, I'm running a budget of $17 billion. Wow, this is pretty freaking big. And I turned to Dan and said, well, Dan, how much you got to grow this year? And he said $17 billion was his growth number. And I felt about yay tall right after that. Let me ask you, first of all, because we're in this digital thing, which I'm going to really question as we get into it. But before we get too much into that, what is the biggest challenge that you are facing today as a CMO with all this change that's going on?
It's a great question.
Or marketers in general.
Yeah. So it's great to be here. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see some really good friends in the audience. And thanks to Barbarian Group as well, some great partners to GE. So I think it's a couple things. Certainly keeping up. When you go to sleep and Facebook acquires WhatsApp for $19 billion, and you wake up and say, should I have been paying attention to that? Shouldn't I have been paying attention to it?
What is WhatsApp, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I had some people say that to me this morning as I was coming in.
Yeah. So I think one is just keeping up. I think for us at GE, it's balancing, Jeff, how much we experiment, and we experiment a lot. We're kind of proud of the fact that sometimes we do chase the shiny object because we think being first matters. It matters for a brand like ours, but you can't get so distracted with that you're not sort of focused and driving results that matter to the brand. And then I think the other thing, at least for us, is the global landscape. So you can go to sleep and feel like, okay, we're doing pretty well here in the United States, and then the landscape in Korea or Nigeria or China is not the same.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I think about.
Valerie, how about you? I mean, you guys are relaunching and doing a lot of different things for Nokia. You've been up, you've been down, and now you're coming back. So how is it different for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great time. You know, I'll just echo some of your comments. I think managing, you know, in some respects as marketers, our jobs are, you know, at the highest level really simple. We're in charge of building demand and, you know, and creating those deep and great relationships. But a lot of it is about managing complexity. And I think that's one of, you know, one of the greatest challenges. We're a global brand. There's a lot of complexity in the business. And I think certainly in the tech and consumer categories, the pace of change is really fast. And obviously in our business, we're used to the pace of change being really quick and being used to that. But one of the things we're seeing, especially with sort of the digital era as an influence in, you know, consumers' ability to express and communicate, is that we're seeing consumer behaviors and perceptions en masse moving equally quickly. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we have to manage, I would say.
Lisa, you guys are regulated pretty heavily with all the things that you do. It's a little different for your brand than others in terms of the kind of conservative nature that you guys typically have, although a lot of people would say you're not as conservative. But in the framework of which you work, how's it different for you?
Well, you know, look, I would say just keeping up with everything that's changing and all of the opportunities. I like to look at it positively, all of the opportunities that are available for brands to communicate, to connect, and to tell their stories is exciting. It can be easily overwhelming. In a regulated industry, for sure, there are challenges that we face in order to understand what the regulators want the environment to look like, and understand how we navigate that so that we're on the right side of that, but still have an opportunity to take advantage and communicate with, you know, through the different channels that exist. I think one of our biggest challenges as a brand is communicating the brand, who we are, what we do, in an understandable way. A lot of our businesses are very complex. I know we all share that. And then connecting it, which I think Wall Street has to, in general, do a better job of, to the why it matters. How is it relevant? How is it affecting, in a positive way, the economy, society, et cetera? Those connections aren't so easily made, so we're grateful for the channels to do so.
I'm going to ask you, but why would you care? I mean, you don't serve the general public. I mean, you serve your constituency. Why would you? Can I hear people talk about this? I'm just jumping in right now.
No, go ahead, it's fun.
But why would we care? You know, whether a 13-year-old not, you know, in such and such in Iowa gives a rat's ass about what you guys do or how you do it.
You know, it's funny, as one of the few B2B plays in the financial services industry, most of our peers have pretty massive consumer-oriented businesses. One of the significant questions that we had to ask ourselves and answer and get comfortable with was, who is it that we're actually trying to communicate with? These aren't, you know, the broader public really isn't going to be a customer of ours. Yet I think as we've all learned, and in the financial services industry, perhaps the hard way through the financial crisis, what's extremely important for a company, for example, of our size and stature, is you don't want to not be understood. And I think in a world where communication has become so democratized with social media, you don't want a conversation to be happening about you or your brand without your knowing about it and without your participating in it. And that doesn't mean you can change that conversation, but really in order to build trust, which is important in any industry, especially ours, we certainly realize the importance of communicating, of being more transparent, and contributing, hopefully, in a way that adds value to conversations that matter.
You mentioned B2B, which is it's a different game for you. You've got B2B and B2C. You've got B2C. Is it different?
I don't think so. I mean, I wish it would go away. I wish this
What,
big
you wish
dark
B2B?
line.
Oh,
no, I wish the divide. No, I hope not. But
I thought we were breaking a new story here or something.
You know, B2B, B2C. I mean, it's people, right?
Right.
And you know, the business decision makers that buy jet engines and locomotives from us are people. They're consuming their information the way I hope other people are. So that's number one. And I think this idea that people get their news and information in a linear way is so yesterday. You know, we talk a lot about how it's more like a pinball machine than it is, anything you'd put on a marketing plan. And, if we're not there to sort of be relevant where people might bump into us, I think we're losing. And the other thing I would say is, for us, and echoes Lisa a little bit, we think about people who share our passions. So we're a company that stood for innovation, invention, science, technology for 134 years. So I was listening hard to Douglas and agreeing with some of it and probably not all of it. But I think we're at our best when we embrace who we really are and find ways to tell that story. And I think that's inherently interesting, whether you're in the C-suite or whether you're thinking about where you're going to go look for that first job.
Don't you think that's the case more now of being real than it used to be? I mean, I didn't agree with all that Douglas said, because to me I thought it was excuse me, Douglas, but if he's still in the room, is he here? Well, then good, I'm talking about him.
Yeah, we can disagree with him as much as we'd like.
Yeah, I didn't agree because I thought it was a very myopic view of saying this is what marketing is. And it's really about telling who you are and what you are and being. I mean, that's what Nokia has to do, right?
For sure. Well, one comment I'll make, and I completely echo the sentiment that we need to be super thoughtful about, we call it the consumer journey. There's a lot of different ways to think about that. And one of the things, we're all talking about complexity, and one of the very complex factors is that our customers are forming opinions and learning about our brand and learning if they care about our brand in so many different ways. And we need to be thoughtful about what are all of those touch points and what can we do to influence that, to your point. But one of the things that I think is really exciting and interesting to be thoughtful about is how you talked about B2C and B2B, how your different lines of outreach can affect each other. So just as a concrete example, when you think of the developer ecosystem, developers we're a platform company as well as a hardware company, especially as we're moving now into Microsoft software and services and experiences are driving demand for hardware. When I think about our consumer marketing outreach, one of my critical constituents are developers. Because developers are consumers of devices as much as they're developers of the applications that drive demand for the devices. So there are two different ways to talk. I'm talking to the developer as a consumer, and I'm also talking to the developer as a business person, as an entrepreneur. And I think that both of those points of view and communication outreaches can influence each other, and I think the same is absolutely true in B2B.
The developers are a huge influence.
Absolutely.
If you don't have them building apps and building things on your platform. You mentioned about how you're organized, and I think that's a cool thing. What most people I don't think in the room know, I was the first person to term chief blogger, and then I termed the first chief listener. I named the very first chief. I remember when I named the first chief blogger, and I put it out, and CDW came after me saying it was a publicity gimmick. Now everyone has a chief blogger, and then I named the very first chief listening officer. Not somebody to listen, to listen to every conversation, but to organize it in a way to get that feedback. Get this to sales and get this to development and product innovation, and get this over to marketing if we had to, or the complaint department. Well, how each of you, when I read the bios, you're organized differently, and I think that's kind of unique. How do you organize for this? I mean, it's not one size fit all. I mean, you got how many CMOs are at GE? 50?
Well, no, not as many as you think. Well, maybe 40 or so, but 35, 40. Okay. But I think it's
a lot. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah, I guess for a company of 300,000, I actually don't think it's that many.
No, probably not. I mean, you guys are the biggest company in the world.
We're not the biggest, but we're up there.
Who's bigger than you guys?
Walmart. It's bigger people-wise.
Wow.
I know, crazy, right? 1 million plus. Wow. But to the point about organization, I mean, this is where I found what Douglas was saying particularly interesting, because I think it gets to where does digital social live. Yeah. And I think for everybody in this room, and I certainly can say for me, Lisa and I have had this conversation offline, it's got to live everywhere.
Yep.
I mean, 3-4 years ago when I was in sort of an early iteration of the job that I have, we sort of had digital as an organization. Jen Walsh was leading it, who's sitting right here today. And I think
you had a digital organization.
We had a digital
group.
I
find that just totally ironic. I really do.
But 5 years ago, it wasn't.
No, but even then, I would think, did you have Did you have a fax officer? Did you have a director of print? Did you have a director of video? I mean,
yeah. So I guess that's the point, actually, Jeff, which is I think today, number one, we've sort of said it's got to be everywhere, right? It's not something that's a skill set. It's got to be in HR. It's got to be in legal for that matter, and it's certainly got to be on the business side. I do think, though, however a company is organized, because there's no one way to do it, I think you have to have some folks, and we firmly believe in this, that are focused on that pointy end of the spear, that are thinking about tomorrow. You know, we
that
sort of
tiger
say,
team that
I
sits
think
up?
so. I think it's people, you know, we sort of say people from the future. And some of those are people that sit in my organization, and some of them are people that sit outside the organization. And we rely on those folks to kind of give us good counsel. And you know, sometimes it's fellow CMOs, and sometimes it's startups. And I think if you don't pay a hell of a lot of attention to where things are headed, and how, you know, whether it's the startup community, developers, what have you, I think you risk being left behind really quickly.
Is digital different for the way you guys look at it, Lisa?
Well, I mean, this might make you laugh, but when I took my role just under 4 years ago, they specifically added "and digital strategy" to my title to make sure that it was something that I would focus on, because at the time, we were not necessarily looking to communicate broadly. There wasn't really as much of a business purpose for it, and you know, it was just so interesting to think about how the financial crisis intersected with the explosion of social media, and then all of a sudden, you know, you were a household name without intending to be so, and therefore understanding digital was important. Digital, ironically, for us became a place that initially no one thought was important. Right? Because in our company, there are still platforms that you cannot access from your desk where you spend the most of your time because of the regulatory environment. And so I'm certainly not going to say that people at Goldman Sachs were naive, but they certainly weren't given an opportunity where they spend the most of their time to interact with and understand platforms as they were emerging at that time. And so, you know, for us, digital became the place where we were able to do our experiments, because nobody thought it mattered. Everybody, for the most part, thought that digital was the realm of the 18 to 24-year-olds. And of course, we were, as an investment bank, talking with, you know, the companies of the future and emerging leaders. So again, I will say it wasn't that we were clueless. However, I think as a means of communication, it was emerging at a time when we needed to start to communicate, and it became the place where it was most thoughtful for us to stick our toe in the water and see.
Did that give you air cover? I mean, to be able to go out and have those conversations because it was going on like that?
I think we had no choice. You know, I think we are very creative about imagining all the things that could go wrong with any situation. We are really, really good at that. And that serves us well in our business. It serves us well in working with clients. But when it comes to transforming things that put you out there to be visible at a time when we were under a lot of scrutiny, you know, that was a high-risk proposition. And I think one of the things that we really came to understand, and which became a guiding principle for, you know, kind of changing the culture of communication at our firm, is to recognize that there's also a risk in not doing something, as much as there's a risk in doing something. And it was very easy to point to examples of where conversations were occurring in digital and social channels, and there was a risk of not being there, even though you were kind of nervous about being there. And I think that for us, you know, really highlighted the importance of focusing on digital and social. And eventually, you know, everyone's reality caught up to where people were gathering information and where people were having conversations.
So how do you look at it, Valerie? I mean, and I'd almost throw mobile in here because we might want to talk about that a little bit too.
Sure.
Because I'm watching people now, you know, I'm watching CMOs actually appoint digital officers, which just drives me crazy because I would never do that as a CMO, ever.
Yeah.
And because I just think it's given away part of your power in terms of the strategy. But how's it for you guys?
So we've been, in the last couple of years, have really embarked organizationally, globally, you know, on what we call digital transformation. We've been a very digital forward company for many, many years. One of the, you know, one of the big observations and insights for our company is, you know, I kind of think it's like astronomy. It's like dark matter. Like no one knew it was there, but then, you know, 20 years ago they figured out it was 95% of the entire universe and it's everywhere. That's what digital is like. Digital isn't it's not a channel. You know, it's not this separate thing. You put the team and they do those things. What we recognized is whether it's mobile or, you know, whether it's social or however people are interacting and having a conversation with our brands across the board, and potentially, as importantly, organizationally, our own teams that are chartered with different types of outreach are doing the same thing. So for us, the challenge is one, and the opportunity is upskilling the whole organization to be facile with the way of thinking about that, and that's tremendously important for a large organization in terms of training and development, and that's a huge opportunity for marketers. So that's great. It's a big priority for us, I would say. And then the second component of it is that we need to connect our product teams that have been, the product teams and the development teams that have been working primarily with offline considerations, whether it's channel marketing or whether those kind of promotional things, and recognizing that if they're not connecting all of their programs to digital, they're leaving money on the table, literally, and opportunity and engagement on the table for us. So that's something we need to really focus on.
Well, in a lot of cases, it's OPM, what I call other people's money. I mean, it's actually, I remember one time sitting on a panel with some CMO, he says, we're moving all of our money into social media for advertising and promotion. I'm going, how?
Yeah.
That was my big question then. Although now you can in a lot of ways, right?
But I would almost say, a dollar isn't a dollar isn't a dollar. I think some of, in our case, our most successful content social programs have been things that are cheap if not free. They've begun as experiments.
But they're real.
They're very
real.
They're
genuine, right?
No, I'll give you, sort of one of my favorite examples, which is, I guess about a year ago, when Twitter launched Vine, GE was the first brand on that platform. Not the first B2C brand, the first brand on the platform, thanks to Paul Markham, who's sitting over there. My team just seems to, have
Raise your hand, Paul, so everybody knows who you are.
Here at Bloomberg.
You get credit, and everybody can rush you after the program.
And the point wasn't so much that we were on Vine first, although that was great.
Right.
But rather, we did a little science experiment. When I say little, I mean little. It was a little Petri dish with some food coloring and a Q-tip. That's about what it cost, right?
Wow.
So what's that, $1.50?
Yeah, not much.
So that experiment exploded online. Great numbers, great engagement, and it led to a program we did over the summer called 6 Second Science, which was a series of, just asking people, go back, embrace your grade school self, so to speak, and send us your science experiments. I mean, I can't even calculate what that would really mean in old marketing dollars.
See, I watch all of you react to that. I mean, because you get excited by that, don't you?
Yeah, very.
I mean, it used to be we tried as brand officers, all right, CMOs, our job was we thought we should control those conversations. We thought we should shepherd it. I can remember, everybody would think we own the brand. We don't own it, do we? And it's really, when it's genuine like that, it really comes through pretty strong.
Yeah. One of the really fun opportunities when it comes to digital from an organizational standpoint is those kinds of experiments and those wonderful, delightful outcomes. They happen when organizations have the courage to decentralize decision making, and that is like I think one of the biggest learnings for larger organizations or organizations of any size is that to be fast and to be nimble and to make that kind of content that takes off. That you almost need a sort of portfolio approach to content development, and you need to iterate and quickly test. But as importantly, because those wonderful viral moments most often are connected to cultural conversations that you're participating in, as opposed to creating on your own. You need to have the speed to do that, which means you need to push and decentralize that decision making down to all the folks that are out there, all the tentacles that are reaching out. It also means they need to personally understand and believe in the DNA of the brand, because we all know that authenticity is the only way to create the kind of connections that can help your brand. And if your folks are working from a do-say sheet and they're reaching out, none of that will work. So,
well, but how do you do that in a big company? I know, because look, moving stuff through a company is not easy. We all know that. Even if you're sitting in the C-suite, it's difficult, right? I've failed so many times that I could give you a whole list. And so, how do you move with that speed? How do you set that up? Because it's going to come at you, and you don't know when it comes at you. I mean, I had a picture went viral a couple of weeks ago. A picture I said I broke my New Year's resolution, and I had a picture of a buddy from that someone sent me, and it said exercise. Eggs are aside for bacon, right? And that was the T-shirt, and I sent it out, and I had 337,000 likes, 60,000 shares, and 14,000 comments in like 24 hours.
And I bet Oscar Mayer was one of them.
I don't know, but I should have got him as a freaking sponsor, I'll tell you that. But when something breaks and it's either good, bad, or ugly, How do you anticipate that, and how has that changed the way you do it? You used to be through it to your corporate communications, right? Those are the folks that would handle it. How's it changed now?
Well, look, we are very centralized still. So, you know, one of the, I guess, benefits of being in a regulated industry is that we're fairly well trained as to the channels you should go to and the people you should communicate with before you necessarily communicate with the outside world, and it has to be that way. So the challenge for us is how do we still really discover and encourage all of the ideas and creativity and fantastic stories that exist within the firm that play to passion points. Even in our industry, there is that sort of thing, and bubble them up so that then we can collaborate, in our case, across the executive office where I sit, where media relations sits, investor relations, internal communications, corporate engagement, et cetera, and we can collaborate together to figure out how to tell those stories in the most appropriate way. We have not aspired to be the most nimble. Okay, we're just not in an industry
I don't know that I would want you to,
where from a
yeah,
communications
right.
perspective,
Doesn't
that's
fit your brand.
necessarily doable. In our business, absolutely. But in our communications, we're just trying to do our best. And if there are moments and we can seize them, you know, 1 in a million, we'll try, but we're pretty realistic about
I mean,
that.
like Oreo. Remember the Oreo thing when the lights went out during, was it Super
Dunk in
Bowl?
the Dark.
Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And then they boom, boom, and it was instant, right? That was like, you're as a marketer, we're all going like, God, that's awesome, right? That's cool. Well, they had a team that pre-planned, was in a room, waiting for something to happen. I mean, do you guys plan for that a little
I think
bit?
you have to plan for serendipity, but I think what you can't do, at least in my opinion, is be the second to do that. So, I mean, we all sat there and admired Oreo, every one of us, I'm sure. You know, brilliant, fast, smart, seized the moment. You know, the second, third, fourth brand, I think you get into a space, Jeff, where you try a little too hard. So I think you have to find your own way of doing it. I mean, back to your point of how do you do this? You mentioned listening before. I think you have smart people on your team and you listen to them. You know, my favorite example is what we did with Instagram 2 years ago. A young person on the team, still on the team, came to Paul and I and said, hey, I'd like to start experimenting with Instagram. I mean, at that point, I wasn't on Instagram. I hate to admit it, but I wasn't. And we said, well, okay, we specialize in these big, dare I say, badass kind of machines. Can we make them beautiful through Instagram? And, you know, coordinated with the great folks at Barbarian. And 2 years later, the pictures that we have on Instagram are magnificent.
They're cool.
They're magnificent.
So what do you do when you screw up, though? I mean, because you do screw up.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, what happens when you screw up? I mean,
I think what happens when you screw up is what creates the space for you to be awesome in the first place. Because in order to push decision making down to the folks that reach out, you need to not punish them when they screw up. And that is critical, and that's all the way up to this, you know, to the CEO. We've done a lot of that kind of outreach. I always say to my team, you know, when you're on the razor's edge, sometimes you're going to bleed a little. And that's actually what you need to do. And I agree with your comments, but I don't know if I agree with not being second, because I think we all have a lot to learn from how other brands are successful. And Nokia learned a lot from Don't Dunk in the Dark, because Tejal Patel is my digital lead over there, which we call our consumer engagement lead in our company. And we still hold the record for the #1 most retweeted tweet by a brand when we retweeted to our friends at Apple that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery when they launched their colorful phones, which we've been doing since the early 90s. And that was, and a lot of it's about the kind of irreverent tone that you can have. And that's why people love the Oreo tweet, because it was fun. But when you are a little too fun and you kind of maybe push the edges a little bit too much, it's tremendously important that your C-suite on down doesn't punish the kids that did it.
Yeah, but no one dies. No one's going to die.
Yeah, we're not saving lives.
I mean, don't get me wrong. You operate heavy machinery. We do some big, important things, but and those you got to be safe with. But by and large, what we're talking about, marketing, most of it happens at paper cut.
I mean, I think it goes back to what Lisa said earlier, which is you carve out a space where you can experiment.
Yeah.
And I mean, to your point of nobody's going to die, when we went up on Pinterest, the last thing I was going to do was call our legal department for an opinion on Pinterest. I mean, it just never would have happened.
Take 8 months to get it back, right?
Yeah, so we said, okay, let's throw up a couple boards. We'll have a little bit of fun with this, and we'll see what happens. Turns out, more than a year later, Pinterest is okay for GE, not a place we spend a lot of time. cost us next to nothing. No harm was done. So I think you have to just sort of.
Have you ever gotten in trouble? I mean, I like once I retweeted because some guy was obnoxious.
I think
when
you
was
wish
at
I
Coda.
did.
Yeah, I wish you
Yeah,
would. I mean, I did.
know.
I tweeted at the guy who was real obnoxious, so I wrote "bite me" and I tweeted it back out. And they said, well, I shouldn't do that. They actually came to me, corporate communications people came to me, you can imagine, they ran into my office, 2 of them, and said, Mr. Hayzlett, we'd ask you, as a corporate officer, please don't do that, you have to be nicer. So then after they left, they said I have to be nicer, so please bite me. And I tweeted that out. So I was like, they got to be better. What, so do you, have you gotten in trouble?
Knock on something, not
Yeah,
yet, but our time will come. You don't experiment and not get in trouble. I mean,
I think that's okay. I think that's okay.
I think that's okay.
We don't do things perfectly. We're not perfect company.
I mean, to be honest, where I think we've kind of learned lessons and gotten bruised, and I'm thinking of something recently, is when we've set out to create a piece of content and we've forgotten how we're going to make it relevant to an audience.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do that, and
which
that bothers
which is really the real purpose.
It's the
I mean,
real purpose.
it's when the doing of it overtakes the why we did it, right?
You get too excited about the creative, and you forget who the audience is and how the distribution's going to go, and that kills me more than a tweet gone awry.
How has this changed your budgets? I mean, we spend a lot of money.
I've gotten smaller.
Yeah, well, they always get smaller. Well, but I do think it's made us more efficient. I mean, without question, digital's made. I mean, I think one aspect of our budget that we used to spend a lot of money for, and I used to spend like $100 million, research. But by the time I got out 4 years, it was gone because I had an instant feedback mechanism that came back, right? So how has it changed your budgets? And certainly it's reduced it, which has made us better, and no one died. And our companies are still growing, right? So there must have been a lot of waste in there, it really was. So how has it changed the way you spend, the allocation of the way you spend?
I mean, I'll start with that question. We never really even had a budget.
Yeah.
And so for us to start in 2010, a corporate advertising campaign was, quite a dramatic thing. And having a budget, we had to make a case for it. We had to ensure that we, were very quantitatively sound and a very quantitative firm to demonstrate something that ultimately was not considered to affect revenue. And so it was a very interesting set of conversations that we had, but nonetheless, we knew it was something that we had to do. I would say that budget, has kind of gotten to a decent steady state over time. It's not huge by any means, but we were able to really go into digital. And now we're 100% digital.
Well, and I think people need to understand with Goldman Sachs, I mean, you got to, I don't know if it's a third, it's got to be at least a third, probably even close to half the people just don't want you to even do it at all.
I think I've accomplished a little bit
better
in
than
my
that,
time building some consensus.
No, I mean, you've done a great job. I mean, the fact that you're here, right? Seriously.
I've survived.
No, but you survived, but you're on the platform. Goldman Sachs wouldn't have done that in 2010, right? So here we are, a few years later, you're here and we're talking about it and you're sharing. I think that's a big, huge accomplishment.
Well, one thing that I'll just mention that I think probably is the case for all of us is as much as we think about outside audiences and stakeholders that we want to communicate with and try to engage and hopefully add value to, it means a lot to our employees. And for us, given all the negative headlines that we've had to deal with through the financial crisis along with other firms, but sometimes very specifically high velocity toward us over that period, our people really, it meant a lot to them that we were trying to at least get into the conversation.
So that's a big part of, even in social media, I mean, that's a big part of your audience too, right?
Huge.
I mean, if you
huge.
can motivate those 300,000 people or whatever, 10,000, 20,000, that's pretty good. I mean, I had 800 people who were tweeting on a regular basis. So. Well, how about your budget, Valerie? How's it changed your budget?
I mean, it's definitely, obviously it's shifted the mix massively, and we've moved increasingly more and more of our budget into, in terms of working media, into digital channels. So that's a change that's happening, especially.
What's the percentage?
Well, I'm not going to comment on percentages, but I think
you need to call somebody to get permission. I got a phone.
I think I got Stephen Elop on speed dial here. But one of the things that I will say that has happened as
is it more than 20%?
Absolutely. As more teams that have traditionally not been in digital move into having agency and are running programs that are started offline and connect to digital, those types of things. One of the really cool things that's happened is that we've all started to want to have the kinds of direct connection to sales and to that kind of impact to our digital spend. So one of the things, we may have decreased some of our budgets on research potentially, but one of the areas we've invested more is trying to get a much more complex understanding, from a modeling standpoint, how our online activity and those different types of online activities, how they connect to sales. We're, in my business, we're in the U.S. Most of our sales go through an operator channel, a distributor channel. We don't have as much a direct connection to retail that we own, and most of the sales go through offline locations. So for us, bringing the kind of discipline that we've had traditionally in some of our offline channels to the kinds of activity we're doing online and trying to model the connection between what happens in social or what's happening in search or what's happening to mobile through the whole customer journey. You guys all probably buy a phone every 2 years when you're up for a contract. That's common across the board. So the 75% of the time you're not looking for a phone, I'm still looking to connect with you. So so I think we've gotten more complex.
But it's actually different. I mean, it's different for the two of you. I mean, where she's really got no more nice, fluffy ads that make, cats cry and everything, which some of us used to do, right? You're now like, it's got to drive sales. It's got to drive that. And I know you've got to do that too, right? But if I think about GE, you got so many companies and I love this stuff. I get excited.
I know, I can tell.
I've had like 4 or 5 hour energy drinks too.
Exactly.
So,
Feeling it.
yeah.
Feeling it.
But you've got all of these, you've got 1 million companies out there, and you can't just do one or another. You do a little bit more broader, theme-oriented kind of campaign. You do.
Yep. So first I'm going to answer your budget question because I have to, because I think I have something
I forgot about squirrel.
that's insightful here, perhaps for the folks here, which is to say that our marketing budget has changed. Certainly the mix has changed, of course, and I'm not going to tell you how much. But what's changed the most is that we are able now with digital and social to shout louder than we spend in a way we never could have before.
Right.
So the dollar we spent on
More direct, a lot more direct, right?
Well, yeah, more direct, but what I actually mean is the $10 we'll spend advertising on the Olympics on air is giving us $1,000 worth of value, because by the time we amplify this,
the step and repeat,
it's unbelievable,
the echoing,
Jeff.
that kind of goes.
The echo, the ripples, whatever you might call it. So back to what do we sell? So I'm not expecting somebody to buy a $500 million heavy-duty gas turbine on Twitter, but I don't think Coca-Cola is expecting them to buy a bottle of Coke either. So for us, what we're trying to do is make sure our brand is relevant, incredibly important for a global brand, incredibly important, particularly when you look at brand relevance. It is hard these days to compete with the folks up here, but the Googles and the Apples and the Samsungs. So how do we use this to make sure that when we do business in 160 countries around the world, which we do, that the brand means something? So that's really important. Yes, we have a whole sort of side of the group that's focused on how do we, do social selling? How do we use marketing automation? Very much part of what we do, but we're long cycle businesses.
So even the mix has really changed. This is the first year, I think, last year maybe, or certainly this year, that marketing will spend more on technology than the chief information officer will. Okay? How is that tip? And I don't think that's for your business.
I don't think so.
I know that. I don't think it is for your business. But for overall, that's what we've seen. How does that change the conversation where we used to have, remember how we used to have to always go to those guys and beg them to implement, whatever system that we were buying for $5,000, and now we're actually spending more than them. Does that change do you walk in with a little bit more swagger and say hello?
To me that goes to my comment earlier around digital becoming an expertise across the organization.
Yeah.
So when you go to the IT department and beg for dollars, that's in a world where the digital department has some ideas about digital, and they're going to go talk to the people that don't do that very much. And that is not the case any longer in our organization. So it may be across the board that overall our investment in digital infrastructure has increased, but we see our channel marketing teams need that, our product marketing teams need that, our direct consumer teams need that, and our sales teams need that, and that's across the board. Then I think the infrastructure challenge becomes, how do you connect the dots between those systems inside so we can talk to each other and know what's going on? And that goes back to me to that this facility and this thinking first about digital needs to be something that doesn't just live in the digital team in marketing, just doesn't live in marketing, that it's a commitment across the organization as a way to connect internally to your stakeholders, connect to your customers, and connect to consumers in general.
We used to talk about sort of this three-legged or two-legged stool, I should say, you know, IT marketing and how we needed to get together and, you know, have a love child or something. And we're not even talking about that anymore.
Messy,
It would be like kind of weird and creepy.
Yeah,
But the truth is, we're just, I don't know, besties. I mean, we talk all the time. What we do is impossible without sort of the tech side of the house. And it's no longer, I mean, I'll own up to the fact that I remember a time where I was just so intimidated, right? You know, you'd walk in and they'd be throwing all these terms out and you'd say, well, what? And I think it's just completely changed.
It's changed, it really has.
I really think it's changed. What I would say in our case is I think it's now sort of a three-legged stool where what we call commercial or sales is also part of that dialogue.
Almost three in a box.
Yeah, it almost is three in a box. It's a good way to say it.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Ironic thing is that my team is working very closely with our technology division to help people better understand out there, either for recruiting reasons or more broadly, that technology is such an important part of Goldman Sachs. So ironically, we're working with them to help them market or tell that story better, just as something that we want to be known for.
Well, so we let that IT department for a long time kind of control that debate. Now, there's another debate that I think is really popping up about who controls data, right? How are you guys handling that? Because that's going to be, you know, we hear about big data, you know, that's the biggest topic that's out there, I think, right now. But who's controlling that? Are you having those kinds of conversations yet, or?
For sure.
I mean, not in a customer product and service kind of way, but it's funny. I mean, I spent the first, you know, decade and a bit of my career sitting on a trading floor in front of screens, in front of data with all sorts of analytics. That's very second nature to me. To now, you know, sort of reincarnate into this role at a time when everything is measurable and where everyone is feeling overwhelmed by data, you know, sort of feels very, very comfortable for me. But I think everyone needs to really spend time figuring out what is important to measure and what that data can help predict and do. You know, we just want to ensure that the money that we are spending is driving the kind of engagement, reaching the audiences, creating the kind of visibility that meet our objectives in all that we're trying to do in telling the story of our brand. You know, we're not attached to selling things for Goldman Sachs in a way that I can imagine companies are grappling with big data in a fascinating way.
Yeah. One thing I would say about data is when you know, certainly to support decision making, and there's an awful lot of, you know, anonymized data you can buy, that sort of thing. I think one of the things when it comes to consumer engagement is kind of like a no surprises policy. I mean, I think great brands are like great people, they're like people you like, you know, and they act in ways you expect, and they act in ways that you would want your friends to act. So I think one of the things that is tremendously important is you can do a lot of damage with a surprise when it comes to people's perceptions about the data that's important to them. So I think that's one of those areas where being thoughtful and being careful makes a lot of difference. And you know, it's a very complex technical space. What is and isn't anonymous information? It's very complex, and so it's an area where you need to be really careful. And that's one of those areas where we're probably less on the go to the razor's edge and get burnt or get cut. This is one of those areas where the no surprises policy is critical.
Aren't you guys thinking like you have somebody that's thinking through this is what we want, is trying to set the expectation of these are the things that I want? I mean, when I was at Kodak, I had 17 CRM systems. Are you kidding me? You know, if someone asked me for a list of my customers tomorrow, they're going to kill my children. Here's the gun. Kill them now. I'll never get a list. It just won't happen. But do you have someone that's thinking this through on your team that's saying, look, this is how we need to have it, you know?
Yeah, on a lot of levels. I mean, when I think about this, you know, I sort of think of almost a pyramid. So, you know, absolutely the idea of sort of that master CRM across as diverse and complicated a set of businesses as we have is still a goal. We're still not there.
Is
We're
it
on the
elusive?
pathway.
Is it like the Moby Dick that you're never going to land?
It's hard.
It's
really hard.
isn't
It's
it?
really hard. But then as I think about other aspects of this, you know, from a social CRM data point of view, I think there are platforms out there, content platforms, the Percolates of the world, that I think are allowing you to do that. And then the other comment I would make as I sort of think about this pyramid is just data that gives us context. So on just sort of a marketing communications level, I don't know about you folks, but when a bad story breaks or when something is good, the question I'm often asked is, was this good or was this bad? And without the data to give you the context of how good is good and how bad is bad, I feel like we're not armed with the way to answer our questions.
Do the social media platforms give you the things you need to do the jobs? I mean, I think they fall short.
We're on our fourth. We've gone through.
I mean, they tell you, oh, they really, really like me.
I think to me, they're noisy if you don't pay attention to them.
Yeah.
But ours, and it doesn't matter which one we use, so I won't even name it. But
you probably use a lot more than one, right?
Well, we do, but we've tried to centralize a bit. It's helpful, obviously. I think if you look at the trend line, you do start to understand, hey, this might have been a tough day because or this might feel like a tough day because, Google alerts make you crazy, right? You get a whole bunch of Google alerts and you're thinking, oh, was this such a good story? And then you look and see, well, the negative sentiment was this. It doesn't really mean much. So I think you have to kind of take the long view of it. Otherwise, it is white noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go. How about some questions in the audience? Anyone? I want to make sure we got a few minutes. I don't want to miss out on anything because I'll keep going. I'm having a blast. Anybody that's got a pressing? Sir, stand up and if we got a mic, we'll get it over to you. If we can't, shout it out very loud.
I don't need a mic.
Okay. There's a woman behind you with one, so let's grab. There's one right behind you. So thank you.
David Wilcox, Reach Scale. Rushkoff left.
Yeah.
You mentioned disagreeing
Big mistake,
on some of his stuff. He should have stayed.
He should have stayed. He would have learned a lot.
On his behalf, I'm going to ask his question. Do you believe what he said about the fact that nobody's going to share your PR? And if you believe that, can you name a flagship effort inside your company that intuitively understands that and is changing the way the company is working in the world in order to create an activity that's big enough and significant enough that people would share it because you recognize that?
You want to tag her? Hey, look, I can tell you when I was at Kodak, I launched products on Twitter. Sold $400 million worth of products just by launching the product through nothing but public relations and social media, and never spend $1 on advertising. So people do share it. I don't take that view. I don't take that view at all.
To me, it's about, like, when someone says people aren't going to share PR, that's another way of saying people don't engage with anything that doesn't mean anything to them. Right. And so
it's a myopic view of PR.
PR isn't everything we do. When we do things that go on a press release and no one cares about, that's PR, probably, a bad PR. But I think the question is, how do you create connection points that really engage with people? And it goes back to, like, a brand is like your friend. Like, you don't want to sit around talking to someone who's just talking at you and not listening to you. You want to have a great conversation with someone about a topic you care about.
You guys are describing something that's different, and I think that's the key point. When Douglas would describe public relations in the old P.T. Barnum way, in the way in which it's just a one-way shouting it out, that's not the way this is. You cannot be successful in this medium doing that, right?
That's right.
You can't just sit there and say, Goldman Sachs is great, because somebody's going to come up and say, no, GS stands for something totally different than that. Right?
It's hard not to just repeat everything Valerie said because I so fundamentally agree with her. But so I'll try to say it a different way, which is, your content has to offer something. Content that tries to sell rarely does. Content that offers utility or entertainment or something that exposes, uncovers your brand in a way that's delightful, that's inherently interesting, works well. So outside of that, I completely agree. I mean, if you sound like a press release, God knows you're not going to be shared.
Right. Yeah.
Stand up there, sir.
Adam Wexler with Insightful. Linda, you mentioned marketing automation, which has obviously just grown a crazy amount over the last couple of years. And this kind of builds on what y'all are talking about right now, but what do you think about the concept of social applying to marketing automation and kind of combining the two from more of an engagement perspective and targeting, like, the right audience rather than broadcasting to the masses maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer, although my answer is going to be a bit shallow, I'm afraid, because I think it's early days on that. But this idea of whether you call it social selling, social lead gen, I think is one that we're seeing sort of the tip of the iceberg on. I'm not sure where it's going to happen. We have hopes for, LinkedIn, for instance, being a platform for that. Again, we haven't seen it yet, but we have hopes that if LinkedIn, for instance, and I think we can all agree on this, is sort of the professional network, how do you find a way without spamming people? And I think that's candidly the challenge. From a content point of view, I think we are there. I think the Percolates of the world are getting us there. But from a selling point of view, I see it as early days for our brand. I don't know, maybe you guys have had other experience.
I would echo that. You can see the potential if you could have exchanges that were authentic and not spammy. Well, we have the infrastructure to just run stuff over that. But this question of how do you do it in a way that's not spammy when you can send one message to 400,000 people? It's a much higher bar not to be annoying.
Mm. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Michael Lee. I'm from Madam. Jeffrey started the day by saying that the role of the CMO is over, or historically over.
No, Chief Advertising Officer. The CMO, I still think, is strongly around for a long time.
But the historical role is very different.
If
one of the historical roles was to control the voice of a brand and making sure that the brand was have a consistent voice, we're in the world of social. That's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to control. Maybe this is a question for Lisa. When you have something like GS Elevator, how do you handle it? Sorry? How do you handle it? How does the brand react or not react when there's something like that hovering around?
I will tell you that there are plenty of alerts I get on an hourly basis, it feels like, with someone talking about us in a way I wish they weren't. I think that one of the interesting things about GS Elevator, which we obviously have to pay attention to, is I sort of wish that there were things we could do together, but the tone and voice are just so different that it's hard to apply a sense of humor there. And as a result, like every brand, we need to listen to every voice out there. And to the extent that people are believing and getting brand impressions that they think represent Goldman Sachs from a voice like that, frankly, is a very disappointing thing.
But do you think people really? I don't think people believe that. I don't think people see GS Elevator and then say that's Goldman. Are there people that operate like that inside? Yeah, there's people who are just bad, that aren't as good. And,
I'm
right?
sure there are people who actually think that those conversations take place in elevators in Goldman Sachs. And that's the fact of having a brand that a lot of people will never interact with directly. Seeing that reminds us of our mission, which is to do whatever we can, whatever is appropriate in the most authentic, relevant, engaging way to help people who are interested understand really who we are and what we do, the people who are at our firm, the values that we have, the things that we care about, and why all that we do with our clients matters. We know we can't control the conversation. We are beyond thinking that we can. What is important, though, is to understand that if you are being talked about in certain channels, you have to listen. We listen. And whenever you can, you need to be in those channels in an authentic and appropriate way, if for no other reason than to offer someone who's interested in learning more the opportunity to find information directly from the source.
And I think in the last couple of seconds that we have as we pull this together, you've just summarized what it really is, in that a brand is nothing but a promise delivered. And for many years, I think most people outside of marketing looked at the role as us telling people what that was and trying to control it, whereas most marketers realized that we never had control of it. At best, we were shepherds of that brand. We were nurturers of that brand. We watered it, we fed it, we sometimes fertilized it from time to time, as we would normally do, but by and large, our customers own the brand. And our job is to practice some ease of social media, and that is to engage, as you mentioned before, to educate, and then hopefully to more ease, to excite and then evangelize, which is the ultimate thing that we're starting to see. So our time is at end. I want to thank all of you for a great, I thought this was going to be engaging. You blew me away even more than what I thought it was. And I think you owe them a big round of applause for great, great sessions.